Hi guys and welcome to the book club once again. JJ actually told me that I should cut to the chase, so let's cut to the chase. And as promised, today we are going to do something very exciting, and it is, drumroll, Rick Rubin's The Creative Act, A Way of Being. What I want to say about this book firstly is that the cover is really very prominent. It's like super minimalist, and I saw it like in so many places, in like airport bookshelves, in different bookstores, even online, and I just can't help but wonder, like, how is it possible to write a book so thick about creativity, right? And if you guys know Rick Rubin is like this bearded guy. If you've seen him on like podcasts and all, he seems like super hipster and kind of like didn't want to touch this book or even try to read it for like few months or maybe like even like 1 or 2 years, because I feel like, oh, you know, all these artists, being an artist myself, all these creatives, just like they're not practical and all that. But I was very pleasantly surprised. So for all of you guys who don't know who Rick Rubin is a producer in this record label called Def Jam Recordings. He's like one of the top producers in the world, actually, music producers in the world. And he produces for people like Jay-Z, Eminem, Ed Sheeran, Lana Del Rey, Adele, Imagine Dragons, Kendrick Lamar, Saint Vincent, Linkin Park, and the list goes on. He's really like one of the top producers in the world. And the cool thing is that apparently he's like not good at music. Like he doesn't play an instrument, if I'm not wrong, and he like can't read notes like a normal classical musician does. But he is a producer, so that's really very cool, right? How do you be creative without kind of like that background? Okay, so here it is. I found this. Basically, he was asked by someone whether he plays any instruments, and he said, barely. I have no technical ability and I know nothing about music.
Do you play instruments?
Barely.
Do you know how to work a soundboard?
No. I have no technical ability, and I know nothing about music.
I mean, whether you believe him or not, either way, he's still quite a peak creative. I was thinking, since I'm into like songwriting and music and creative stuff in general, right? So I want to hear what he has to say, like, even though I think he's kind of like hipster and maybe not practical and all that. So kind of like a quick summary of the book. Rick Rubin thinks of being a creative as not just an act, but as a way of being. So as a creative, you're not just like making art or doing like artistic things. You are actually being someone who is creative. The way you engage the world, the way you like observe things and all that, you have to be a creative through and through, and it's not just kind of like a job or kind of like just one aspect of yourself. He really believes that everyone is a creative. So I'm very pleasantly surprised by this book. Rick Rubin is actually a very, very practical person, but also in a creative way. I think that he has this kind of like balance towards like being a creative, like a full creative, and being practical about his art. So one of the things that he believes, that being a creative is not just like a job, it's not like just one aspect of yourself, but as a creative, you have to embrace it in your entire life, where you get inspired in every situation, where you basically observe life with your 5 senses, engage with the world in a creative way at every point in time in your life. And then in the book, he really gives like some really practical tips about like how to overcome some challenges, how to be more creative, what is actually like the best structure towards creativity. So he also talks about collaboration, he talks about mindfulness, he talks about overcoming resistance and dealing with feedback and all that. So I feel like this book is kind of like the book to go to if you are wandering creative. So this book, The Creative Act, is, in my opinion, is a really holistic book for people who want to be creative, and for even the normal person who just wants to be more creative in their everyday life. Some insights in this book that really struck me. Number one is having a structure and a routine. So I think when I was younger, as a creative person, I always think that, I need to work with no boundaries, and even in my daily schedule, like maybe I just wake up at like 1 p.m. and do whatever I want, and then I'll be creative like that. But what Rick says, that's not the case actually. Having routine and having structure in your life, like what we talked about in Atomic Habits, in terms of like your routines, and also in like having some constraints or like the structure of a certain art piece that you work with, actually can help you be more creative. Having those guardrails can allow you to experiment around the guardrails. After you kind of master that, you can then go on towards breaking the mold and breaking the form, and that's where creativity really actually starts to develop in you, especially in that art form or even in life. So I think that's what I actually learned. I remember I read it in a WikiHow page about how to be more creative, and then in the WikiHow page it actually said that like to fix a routine. So I was like so mind blown by then, at that time. Then when I started building a routine, I realized that hey, actually I can be more creative while having a routine, so that I don't really have to think about what I gotta do every day and focus on being creative at the points where it matters. Like when I'm at my work, like writing music, anything business. Yeah. The second thing that actually is quite valuable for me in this book is about mindfulness and being present. As a creative, I think what Rick Rubin suggests is to actually have moments in time where you are actually being present and being mindful of the things around you, observing the small things, the nothingness, and then you somehow will get inspired by something that just seems really ordinary. That's something that actually I have been trying to learn. The way that I thought creativity is like when you go to like a huge beautiful place and then you become really creative. But I actually have friends who are super creative, who actually look at like the small things around them, and then they really create, like whether they are like photographers or music people or like songwriters. They can just like express so much about something that is so minute and so ordinary. I think that is actually why being a creative needs you to be fully involved as a person, like what Rick Rubin says. Number 3 is about projects. How do we deal with like challenges, and how should the creative process be? So I've been to many creative conferences, right? And some of them say, oh, you need to let creativity like flow through you, and sometimes it's just that spark and then everything just comes. Like there's this poet, I forget who said that, like when she's in the gardening or in the fields, and when suddenly inspiration comes, she will run all the way back to her house and then pull the words from and write the poem backwards. I mean, it's a joke, but I think that's how some people feel like their creative works come. And then on the other hand, there are some people who say, they spend like years and years writing this poem or writing this book or like painting this art piece and all. So I was honestly quite confused in terms of which should it be then? Should it be the one that is long drawn and takes some time, it takes so much effort, or should it be the one that like, pop, and you write a song within like 30 minutes? I think that was what I was thinking about for actually a lot of times in my creative life, because I sometimes spend months and months on a song and get nowhere. So what Rick Rubin says is that it's both, right? It's sometimes you get the inspiration immediately and you actually are able to like finish something so fast because you're super inspired at that moment. Sometimes there are some projects that you would need to keep working on, but then it is very important to kind of like differentiate whether the one where you are spending a lot of time on, do you still feel inspired by it? I think that's what he said. If you don't feel inspired by it and you are just stuck, it is okay to just let it go and work on something new, because this inspiration, this creativity will flow, and to have that abundance mindset of like letting projects go and come back again next time, or not even come back again next time, that is kind of like a very good mindset, that letting go mindset that you need to have as a creative. While of course in some cases it's just like the creativity just flows. And what Rick Rubin says is that creativity isn't coming from you per se. It's like this mythical being. I mean, that's kind of like his thought about creativity. And sometimes I feel it's true, right? When I used to write poems when I was younger, the words or like the melodies just come in, and when you look back at it, even like a few days later, you're like, what came into me to be able to write this? Because my English isn't so good, or like I'm not that musical. So I think what Rick says is really true about this creative force, and just being the vessel to allow it to pass through you is kind of the key of being a creative. And then comes this thing, right? Perfectionism. I think that's something that I used to have, and I'm trying to work against it. Perfectionism is really something that kills creativity. I think there are a lot of like podcasts and a lot of short form videos out there telling all of us this, that to not be a perfectionist. And I could see it in my previous works also, my previous artistic works. I just keep trying to create the perfect idea, trying to make sure that the song comes out perfect, trying to sing it a way that is flawless, right? But sometimes it's good that it's imperfect. And you know how I learned to not be so perfectionist is actually through my wife, Rochelle, who is really like, okay, if this is 80% there, just let it go. Then I was like, how could you like just release or like post this video when it's not perfect? She's like, it's okay. Imagine if you're a perfectionist, you spend like 1 hour editing one photo, or like maybe you spend a year on one song, while actually you could like churn, don't know, maybe like 12 songs a year kind of thing. And through that 12 songs, you can actually already improve. By the time you reach to that 1 year, you would have progressed much more than if you actually just sat down and focus on one song and then try to make the 99% 100. You know, you'll never ever get there. And what Rick Rubin says about like feedback and your own personal feedback is to when to really stop and actually let this creative work just have a life on its own into the world. And the last thing that I want to talk about, that Rick Rubin talks about in this book, is feedback and how to deal with other people's feedback and your own kind of criticism for yourself. Having a very good balance between both of these actually gives you a more healthy relationship with feedback and with others in general. I've heard so many dramatic moments of like people just not taking feedback very well, and honestly, personally, I have taken feedback very badly when I was younger, especially with regards to creative works, right? And I just couldn't deal when like one person actually tells me like, oh, you know, you sang a wrong note, and I just crumble, and that person will just completely spoil my day. But if I actually had this book like when I was 18, like 10 years ago, I would have actually got past all this trauma in my creative life about like, oh, thinking I'm not creative, or like thinking I'm not good enough and all that. When I was younger, I remember I performed at Esplanade in Singapore, right? And I got like just one negative feedback, and it really just affected me so much. And then I keep having like voices in my head telling me like, oh, you're not good enough, why are you even doing this, how can you say that you're a singer, and all that. It really just knocked me off, and I just didn't want to perform for the next few months. But if I had that self-compassion then to know it's okay, it's just one note and everybody makes mistakes, and I love myself, and having that compassion for myself in my own journey as a creative, it would have helped me be more stable throughout my creative journey and also in life as well. And this self-compassion actually helped to counteract the fear of failure, and which actually helps you be more willing to experiment and play and innovate. So here comes the exciting part where we talk about the difficulty and the change my life meter. So for difficulty level, This is the dimwit level. It's the dimwit level. It's 2 out of 5. It's really quite easy to read. I think the concepts are not difficult at all, and the way Rick actually wrote it is really for everyone. So I think even if you are in your early teens, you can actually try to understand, read this book and try to like glean something from it. I think this book is not hard at all to read. And for the Change My Life meter, the irony of this is that this book is more of I'm so angry about this book, right? Because if it was published 10 years ago, I would have gotten my hands on it, and then I wouldn't have gone through so many ups and downs in my creative life, and I would probably be still doing the creative things that I wanted to do, like music, like writing, like even doing photography and videography. So I guess this is a would have changed my life meter. So out of 5, this is a 4. So out of 5, this is 4, which is Epiphany. Or even if you just kind of like want to be more attuned to yourself, to be more yourself, you know what I mean? Like to find yourself, I think this book is really great. And if you are just like me 10 years ago, whether doing art is for you, or even like whether doing business is for you, then I think reading this book and finding yourself and going through what Rick Rubin actually talks about in this book, all the different practices and all that, I think it really would help you find your creative self and be attuned and generally live a more fulfilling life in the world that we live in now. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of the book club. You can like and subscribe for more, and if you want me to review any other book, please write it in the comment section below, and I'll see you next week.